vanished beyond the edge of empire. Night settles over the mossy ruins of an old Roman fort, half swallowed by mist and time. Stones, once squared by legionary hands, lie scattered like broken teeth across wet grass. Somewhere among them, an inscription fades, a name, a number, a fragment of glory, and from these ruins drifts the question that refuses to die. How does an entire legion of Rome, the ninth, no less, simply vanish, leaving behind only silence, rumor, and the wind's hollow whistle through empty watchtowers? You probably won't sleep soundly after this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine it. Nearly 5,000 disciplined soldiers, hardened by campaigns from Hispania to Britannia, standard bearers holding aloft the proud eagle standard, its wings outstretched in gilded defiance of Rome's enemies. They build roads, fortresses, and walls across the empire's bleeding edge, yet at some unknown hour in the 2nd century, their banners vanish from history, their names scratched out of Rome's rolls, as though an imperial hand decided silence was safer than truth. A mainstream historical fact, the 9th Legion, Legio IX Hispana, was active in Britain until at least the early 2nd century CE. They helped build the fortress of Eboracum, modern-day York, and guarded Rome's uneasy northern frontier. Their discipline was legendary, their losses always replaced, until, suddenly, they weren't. A quirky, lesser-known detail. In the old fort at York, archaeologists discovered tiles stamped with the legion's mark, scattered in strange places, as if hurriedly abandoned, or broken during an unexpected flight. Historians still argue whether the 9th met its end crushed by tribal rebellion in the north, quietly disbanded after dishonor, or transferred far away to vanish in some distant war. No record tells us. The empire that so loved its stone inscriptions, triumphal arches, and marble scrolls left nothing but silence where the 9th once stood. Tonight, we follow the footprints left in that silence, step by uncertain step, across misty moorland, worn altars, and half-erased names chiseled in sandstone. We'll trail rumors of doomed marches into the highlands, whispered tales of survivors driven eastward, and a single chilling suggestion that Rome, faced with defeat, chose to forget rather than record. Picture a cold dawn over Hadrian's frontier. The morning mists curl around ruined ramparts. Sheep graze where sentries once watched, and the wind sighs through grass-grown walls. Somewhere beneath that earth, perhaps, lies a rusted helm or a splintered shield from the 9th's final hour. Yet above ground, no witness remains, only stories passed down from monk to scholar, soldier to antiquarian, growing stranger with each telling. A mainstream fact, the disappearance of Legio IX Hispana remains one of Roman history's most persistent mysteries. Not because records of military disaster are rare, Rome had many, but because here, the record itself dissolves as if deliberately erased. A quirky note. Some say the 9th's eagle standard was secretly hidden rather than captured. A final act of loyalty by men who knew they would not return. Somewhere, perhaps buried in bog or barrow, it waits. And so begins our journey into loss, rumor, and the stubborn echo of a name that once made enemies tremble. A name Rome could not, or dared not, explain away. Where did 5,000 men go? And why does the emptiness they left behind still whisper through ruins? Like a question the empire feared to answer? That question, chilling and stubborn, is where the story begins. The eagle standard left behind, somewhere in the swirling mists of northern Britain, or perhaps buried far from those gray hills, a single eagle standard may lie hidden. Its gilded wings dulled by centuries of rain and rust. It's strange, isn't it? An empire could build roads that outlast kingdoms, walls that cut the landscape like scars, yet be undone by the loss of a single object, a staff topped by a golden bird. The eagle wasn't merely decoration, it was the heart of a legion's soul. To lose it was worse than death, a shame recorded in marble and memory alike. Yet with the 9th Legion, even that humiliation left no inscription, no whispered confession, Only silence. A mainstream historical fact. Every Roman legion carried its aquila, or eagle standard. Legionaries swore oaths before it, fought to the last to protect it, and retrieved it at terrible cost if it fell into enemy hands. The standard was guarded by the aquilifer, a soldier chosen not just for strength but for unwavering loyalty. A quirky, lesser-known detail. It's said that in times of danger, the aquilifer would sometimes bury the eagle to keep it from capture, choosing dishonor in Rome's eyes over the disgrace of enemies parading it in triumph. Historians still argue whether the ninth eagle was ever taken by Britain's northern tribes, or if it vanished another way. Some suggest it was lost in a desperate final battle on mist-wrapped hills. Others think it may have been quietly hidden as the legion retreated or was reassigned. Picture it. Dawn breaking through Scottish fog. A knot of weary soldiers clustered around a shallow pit. The aquilifer's hands trembling as he lowers Rome's sacred symbol into cold earth. He glances back at his comrades, faces smeared with mud and fear, and then smooths the soil, erasing the last trace of glory. What might drive men to bury the very soul of their legion? Perhaps defeat, perhaps shame, or perhaps something worse. The creeping realization that Rome would never send relief. A mainstream fact. The loss of an eagle was a deep stain on Roman honor. When Crassus lost his standards to the Parthians, it haunted the empire for decades until Augustus recovered them by diplomacy, an act so important it was carved on monuments. A quirky note. The aquilifer who failed to protect the eagle could face brutal punishment. Even execution. Though sometimes the story ends differently, some vanished into self-imposed exile. Legends whisper. Historians still debate why the ninth's disappearance left no such recorded shame. Did the legion's eagle vanish quietly to avoid imperial embarrassment? Was the loss so complete that none survived to tell the tale? Or did Rome's scribes quietly strike the ninth's name from the lists rather than record a defeat too humiliating to remember? Think about it. An empire that documented everything, from a governor's expense receipts to the births of foals at imperial stables, left nothing about the fate of thousands of its own. As though someone in power decided forgetting was better than truth. And yet, even forgotten, the eagle lived on in story. Medieval monks scribbled tales of a lost standard glimpsed in a barbarian chieftain's hall, glinting by firelight as proof of Roman defeat. Antiquarians in later centuries scoured riverbanks and bogs, hoping to glimpse a flash of gold in the mud. One mainstream fact. No eagle standard of the 9th Legion has ever been found. Some partial standards have surfaced elsewhere in Britain, but none conclusively linked to the vanished legion. A quirky note. In the 19th century, a farmer digging near the Antonine Wall claimed to have unearthed a golden bird. But it disappeared before scholars could see it. Was it real, or a legend reborn in hopeful imagination? Historians still argue. Would the Ninth's men have died to protect the eagle? Or lived with the guilt of hiding it? Perhaps they believed Rome itself had abandoned them, and so they abandoned Rome in turn. Whatever the truth, that missing eagle has become almost as famous as the lost legion itself. It stands for something larger, the fragility of pride, the silence of shame, and the moment when an empire's myth meets the stubborn reality of defeat. So as we search for the Ninth's final trail, remember that buried standard. A bird whose wings once led thousands into battle. Now lost to marsh and memory. Somewhere, perhaps, it still lies beneath moss and peat, waiting to catch the light of a forgotten sun, and remind us that even Rome could lose what it prized most. Legio IX Hispana, born in blood. Long before whispers of misty moors and vanished eagles, the 9th Legion earned its fearsome name in the hard sun of Hispania. Blood and rebellion shaped it, and that iron reputation was hammered flat across centuries of war. To understand how a legion could vanish, we first have to know what kind of legion it was. Mainstream historical fact. Legio IX Hispana, the Spanish 9th, was raised in the 1st century BCE. Likely by Pompey during Rome's bitter civil wars. It fought in Hispania, crushing rebellions that threatened the young republic's grasp on the western provinces. By the time Julius Caesar marched on Rome, the 9th had already been blooded and bound by shared oaths. A quirky, lesser-known detail. Legionaries often named their legion with a mix of pride and gallows humor. The 9th earned a second name, Hispania, not from its birthplace but from the ferocity with which it subdued tribes in Hispania. They left more than roads behind them. They left fields sown with salt and memories whispered to scare children at night. Historians still argue whether that early violence made the Ninth unusually fierce or unusually cursed. Over time, it became one of Rome's most traveled legions, sent wherever rebellions smoldered, and wherever it marched, stone altars, broken swords, and burnt settlements traced its passing. Imagine them decades later, under Emperor Claudius, crossing the gray waves to Britannia, a new frontier, wild and cold, where tribes painted themselves blue and fought from dense forests instead of open fields. The Ninth was at the heart of the Roman invasion in 43 CE, building roads and forts that would become the bones of Britain's Roman landscape. A mainstream fact, in AD 60, the Ninth faced Boudicca's rebellion, when the Iceni queen led a furious uprising that burned Roman towns to ash. Legend holds that the legion marched out to stop her and was nearly destroyed. Its commander, Petilius Cerealis, barely escaped with the cavalry. A quirky note, after that disaster, the Ninth was reinforced, not disbanded. In Roman eyes, defeat wasn't always fatal. Loyalty and usefulness could redeem even a battered legion. Historians still argue how badly the Ninth suffered in Boudicca's revolt. Some accounts say thousands died. Others suggest the legion's core survived and rebuilt. Yet what matters is that they stayed. Bricks stamped with Leg IX Hisp turn up in rebuilding efforts after the rebellion. A quiet testament to their resilience. Picture it. Legionaries, some still bearing scars from Boudicca's chariots, reshaping burned forts and temples under gray skies, hammers ringing in dawn mist, curses mixing with prayers, and a stubborn refusal to leave the edge of empire. The Ninth's history is written in layers of conquest, disaster, and stubborn recovery. In Hispania, they crushed rebels. In Britain, they faced near annihilation and still rebuilt. That story made them symbols of Roman resolve, and perhaps also of imperial blindness, that Rome believed discipline alone could tame any frontier. One mainstream fact: the Ninth was based for a time in Lindum, modern Lincoln, before moving north to Eboracum, York. Archaeologists still find stamped tiles, altars, and funeral inscriptions in these places, each one a faint echo of daily life. Soldiers who worshipped local gods, buried their dead, and worried about pay and wine more than grand destiny. A quirky detail: among the inscriptions is a memorial for a legionary's wife, a reminder that behind the marching columns were families, camp followers, and children who lived and sometimes died on Rome's shifting border. Historians still debate why the Ninth seemed to attract disaster in Britain. Was it unlucky, poorly led, or simply stationed where rebellions flared hottest? In the empire's careful records, the difference between ill fortune and imperial blame could mean life or oblivion. The Ninth's story is not just one of battles fought, but of battles remembered and forgotten. It became a paradox, too famous to ignore, yet too awkward to record when it finally vanished. As we follow the Ninth further north, past the quiet lands of Lincoln and York, remember this: these men were not ghosts or myths. They were flesh and bone, sons and fathers, who bled to carve roads and raise stone walls, and who, in some final moment, faced a choice no historian can quite recover. Where they went from there, and why, remains the question that keeps their memory alive. For now, we leave them on the eve of another northern posting, marching beyond the last Roman road into lands where eagles dared, and sometimes died. Murmurs along Hadrian's frontier. It's dawn on the raw edge of the Roman world. A pale sun crawls above rolling hills cloaked in mist, and along the watchtowers of Hadrian's unfinished wall, sentries peer northward into lands they barely understand. Somewhere behind those walls, the Ninth Legion waits, scarred, rebuilt, and sent once again to stare down the tribes Rome never quite conquered. A mainstream historical fact: around AD 122, Emperor Hadrian visited Britain and ordered the construction of the massive stone barrier we now call Hadrian's Wall. Stretching roughly 73 miles across the island's narrow waist, it was both a defensive line and a statement of imperial resolve, thus far. And no further. A quirky, lesser-known detail: parts of the wall were built by legions who carved playful inscriptions into the stones, depictions of phalluses for good luck, carved faces, even rude graffiti mocking local officials. Among these, a handful of stones still carry the faint mark, Leg Ix Hisp, suggesting the ninth was here, helping shape Rome's final northern frontier. Historians still argue whether the ninth was stationed along Hadrian's wall during its final years, or if it vanished before the wall's completion. The timeline is infuriatingly blurred by missing records, partial inscriptions, and the cold indifference of the soil. Picture the daily grind of legionary life, building mile castles, repairing turf ramparts, hauling stone in chill rain. By night, men crowded into smoky barracks, trading gossip and dread. Beyond the firelight, darkness stretched across marsh and moor, a darkness from which painted warriors might emerge at any hour. A mainstream fact: Roman sources mention repeated unrest among the northern tribes. The Caledonians, the Brigantes, and smaller federations who knew the bogs, forests, and hidden passes far better than any Roman general. A quirky note: some legionaries, posted on this frontier, carved dedications to local deities, spirits of rivers, springs, and sacred groves, just in case Rome's gods failed them in these alien lands. Historians still debate what finally broke the uneasy balance. Was it a single massive rebellion, long planned in whispered councils around smoky hearths? Or a slow bleed of skirmishes, ambushes, and lost patrols that wore the ninth thin? Imagine the fear creeping through a fortress when riders arrived breathless, reporting raided outposts and butchered scouts. Commanders scanning the horizon, wondering if the next dawn would bring an all-out assault, or merely more waiting. The Ninth Legion was no stranger to such tension. They had survived Boudica, after all, and rebuilt their ranks. But now, decades later, their veterans long buried, replacements drawn from distant provinces. The Ninth might not have been the same hardened force. One mainstream fact: by the early 2nd century, the Ninth's veterans from Claudius' invasion were gone. The men now polishing armor in smoky barracks had never seen Hispania or faced Boudica's fury. They were new blood, bound by the same eagle, but perhaps not yet welded by the same terror. A quirky note: among the ruins of one fort near the wall, archaeologists found dice, gaming boards, and carved bone counters, signs of boredom and fatalism. A legionary could spend as much time gambling as training. The future always uncertain. Historians still argue whether the Ninth's disappearance was sudden, a single catastrophic defeat, or slow. As the Legion was worn down by attrition, transfers, and quiet disbandment, Rome recorded triumphs eagerly. Disasters were often buried beneath euphemisms. Imagine that final northern posting. Rumors swirling through cramped barracks. Men staring into firelight, asking each other if the Ninth would finally be sent home, or sent beyond the frontier one last time. In the gray dawn, trumpets sounded, shields buckled on, and the Ninth's eagle standard was lifted high. Beyond the wall stretched forests and bogs where no Roman road had yet dared to cut. And in that uncertain silence, perhaps, the Ninth stepped forward and into mystery. What they faced there remains a blank space on the map, a hole in the record so deep that historians still peer into it, hoping for a glimpse of what truly happened on Rome's ragged edge. A garrison gone silent. Imagine a fortress built of stone and iron discipline, where orders echoed off walls and the beat of marching feet set the rhythm of daily life. Fires burning in barracks, cooks stirring stews, smiths hammering armor plates straight. And then, one morning, nothing. Hearths cold, gates ajar, half-finished letters scattered like autumn leaves across the parade ground. A mainstream historical fact: in Eboracum, modern York, the Ninth Legion's name stops appearing in inscriptions after the early 2nd century. Where once bricks and altars proudly bore Leg Ix Hisp, suddenly there is silence, as if the Legion had melted away like mist. A quirky, lesser-known detail: archaeologists uncovered unfinished building projects in the Legion's last known fortress. Foundations laid, but walls never raised. It looks as if someone planned to stay, but never got the chance. Historians still argue whether the Ninth was destroyed in battle, transferred quietly to another province, or disbanded in disgrace. Each theory begins in the same eerie place: a garrison gone silent. Picture it: the chill dawn after disaster. Barracks doors swing open in the wind. Cooking pots lie tipped and crusted with last night's meal. In a commander's quarters, a wax tablet waits for a message that was never written. Somewhere, the standard's shrine stands empty. The aquila missing, or buried. Legionaries, even in defeat, rarely left everything behind. But here, absence is the loudest clue. No victory monument. No list of fallen heroes. No words to explain where thousands of men went. One mainstream fact. Other legions replaced the 9th in Britain not long after its disappearance. The 6th Legion, V. Victrix, arrived in Eboracum and took over its fortress. Roman bureaucracy rolled on as if nothing had happened. A quirky note. Some historians suggest the replacement itself hints at disaster. Rome needed new troops fast, but didn't want to advertise why. Historians still argue why the empire, so obsessed with recording victories, would leave such a gap. Was it easier to pretend the 9th had never existed than to admit it was gone? Think about what this silence implies. No triumph to parade, no tale of heroism to soothe public fear, just emptiness. It hints at shame, or at a defeat so thorough it defied spin. Archaeologists comb the fortress ruins for clues. They sift charred grains, broken pottery, fragments of spearheads, a piece of stamped tile here, a half-erased inscription there. Each fragment whispers, but none tells the whole story. Some speculate that the 9th marched north to confront a rising tribal confederation and never returned. Others think it was transferred quietly to the Rhine frontier, where it dissolved into new legions. A handful even believe it was sent east, swallowed by desert sands in a campaign so disastrous Rome refused to name it. One mainstream fact. The last datable evidence of the 9th in Britain is an inscription from around AD 108. After that, the record blurs into rumor. A quirky note. Later Roman historians writing decades afterward barely mention the 9th, as if even they found its fate too uncertain, or too dangerous, to describe. Historians still argue whether silence itself became a strategy. Better to erase the 9th from the rolls than let its defeat embolden enemies or unsettle Rome's citizens. In the empty fortress, cold wind rattles the barracks shutters. Dust gathers on abandoned altars, and somewhere under collapsed beams, a legionary's scratched prayer to Mithras lies unseen. The 9th's disappearance isn't just a question of where it went, but why no one chose to say. In a world built on records and memory, forgetting can be an act of power as final as a sword. So the fortress stands, silent and unfinished, waiting for an answer that never came. And the silence left behind is louder, in its own way, than any triumphal arch Rome ever built. The fog of rebellion and retreat. Beyond the stone walls and the edge of known roads lay the shifting frontier, dense forests, peat bogs that swallowed footsteps, and tribes who knew every hidden pass and valley. Into that fog, it's believed, the 9th Legion marched one last time. A mainstream historical fact. Britain's northern tribes, like the Caledonians and the Meaeti, never fully submitted to Roman rule. Even after decades of campaigns, Rome's grip was more presence than control, enforced by forts, patrols, and fear rather than true peace. A quirky, lesser-known detail. Roman scouts reported that some tribes practiced fighting in the dark, using the moon's shape to plan raids, or wrapping horse hooves in leather to muffle the sound of cavalry. Guerrilla war. Centuries before the word existed. Historians still argue whether the 9th's final march ended in a single crushing defeat, or if it became a retreat that turned into ruin. Men slipping away in 2s and 3s until there was no legion left to name. Picture it. The legion assembled before dawn. The eagle standard rising against low gray clouds. Armor chilled by northern winds. Breath misting in the cold. Officers murmuring to each other, glancing north toward hills that seemed to move with every gust of fog. The 9th had been here before, suppressing raids, rebuilding outposts burned in the night, forcing tribes into uneven truces. But something felt different. Rumors had trickled south, larger gatherings of warriors, coordinated raids instead of scattered skirmishes, scouts who didn't return. One mainstream fact. Roman sources tell of a major tribal uprising in the early 2nd century, but the details are scarce. Perhaps deliberately blurred. We know there was bloodshed, we don't know exactly whose. A quirky note. At least one Roman poet, writing generations later, mentions the lost legion beyond the mists, a phrase so brief it could almost be a rumor he heard in a tavern. Historians still debate if that lost legion was truly the ninth, or a different unit whose story merged with the ninth's in memory and myth. Imagine the legion's final days on campaign, roads turning to muddy tracks, supply carts bogged down, food running low, men waking each night to distant horns or imagined footsteps, discipline fraying like worn leather. Perhaps the ninth reached a tribal stronghold and faced an ambush too swift and brutal for even their storied discipline. Or perhaps they turned back, only to be harried all the way south, losing men mile by mile until the survivors staggered into silence. One mainstream fact: no known battlefield in Britain has yielded clear evidence of the ninth's destruction, no mass graves, no shattered eagle, no named tombs. The land keeps its secrets. A quirky detail: later legends tell of ghostly soldiers marching through Scottish mists, bronze armor glinting under moonlight, doomed to patrol forever. Historians still argue why, if the ninth was destroyed in Britain, no record trumpeted vengeance campaigns. Rome usually made a show of punishing defiance, yet here, nothing. Could it be that the ninth's defeat was so humiliating, so total, that even an empire of stone and scroll chose silence over memory? Or did Rome quietly disband the broken remnants, scattering the survivors into other units, erasing the legion's name from monuments and rolls? The fog that swallowed the ninth is more than weather, it's the perfect metaphor. In that gray emptiness, rumor and fact blur. Stones whisper hints but keep the ending veiled. And so the ninth's last known march becomes legend. Men moving north through damp valleys and shadowed woods, shields slick with rain, each mile taking them further from Rome's light. Somewhere, they met an end no historian has fully recovered, whether in a pitched battle lost to time, or a slow retreat that dissolved into shame. The ninth passed beyond the edge of record and never returned. What remains is the silence, and the stubborn human need to keep asking what happened, even when the land itself refuses to tell. The eagle's shadow in the east. If the ninth legion vanished in Britain, that should have been the end of their story. Yet strange rumors echo not just in the northern mists, but far across the empire's reach, whispers that survivors marched under other skies. A mainstream historical fact: around AD 160, inscriptions in Nijmegen, in what is now the Netherlands, mention Leg IX. Historians disagree whether this was a fragment of the Old Ninth or a clerical echo, but the possibility keeps the mystery alive. A quirky, lesser-known detail: centuries later, Roman roads still bore milestones stamped with Leg IX Hisp, as if the empire itself struggled to forget them completely. Historians still argue whether a core of the ninth was quietly transferred to the Rhine frontier, an imperial shuffle to cover losses and hide disaster. Imagine it: a legion reduced to half strength, its eagle concealed or replaced, its veterans haunted by memories of bog and blade. Picture them on the limes, timber watchtowers overlooking sluggish rivers, Germanic tribes on the far banks, and the same weary drills. For some, the northern mists might have felt safer than these broad open plains. One mainstream fact: Rome often transferred legions after major defeats to stop local unrest from spreading and to give survivors a fresh start, or to bury a scandal under fresh victories. A quirky note: the Roman army's bureaucracy could outlive the soldiers themselves. A legion might survive on paper, its name appearing in pay scrolls or stonework, long after its men were dead or reassigned. Historians still argue: did Rome keep the ninth alive as an administrative ghost? Some evidence hints at a ninth active in the east decades later, possibly fighting Parthians in the burning deserts beyond the Euphrates. Imagine men who had survived Britain's peat bogs now shielding their eyes from desert sun, sweating in iron helmets as they built camps of sand and stone. Perhaps they hoped the heat might burn away old memories. A mainstream fact: Eastern campaigns were costly and brutal. Legions disappeared there too, not by mystery, but by arrows, sunstroke, and endless siege. A quirky detail: in Chinese chronicles from the 2nd century, there's mention, still debated, of a Roman-like force captured by the Parthians and resettled far east. Did stray survivors from the ninth become part of that tale? Historians still argue how many men would have made such a journey alive, and whether a legion still calling itself the Ninth could survive that far from Rome's shadow. And yet, human memory clings to symbols. Even if the original Ninth died in Britain, its number and eagle might have traveled, carried by a stubborn few who refused to lay them down. Picture an officer polishing a battered standard in a desert camp. The eagle's wings dulled, but still recognizable. Around him, new recruits speak different dialects, some barely understand the legion's history. Yet in quiet moments, the old survivors remember fog, rain, and a road that vanished into a northern forest. One mainstream fact: by the late 2nd century, official lists of legions no longer include the Ninth. It disappears from record as surely as it once marched out of Eboracum. A quirky note: centuries later, medieval chroniclers still spoke of a lost legion, though their stories mixed fact, folklore, and longing. Historians still argue, if the Ninth perished in Britain, why do traces of its name appear elsewhere? Are they proof of survival, or stubborn echoes in Rome's vast paperwork? In the East, where sand could bury bones as completely as peat, the last men who called themselves the Ninth may have looked west each night, remembering stone walls, damp cloaks, and comrades lost in boggy valleys. Perhaps they, too, wondered how a legion could vanish, and why no one dared to speak of it. So the Ninth's eagle casts its shadow across both mist and sand. Its final fate is splintered as empire itself, part lost, part hidden, and part reborn in rumor. Monuments that don't speak. Rome loved to build in stone, triumphal arches, inscribed altars, and milestones etched with victories. Yet when it comes to the Ninth Legion, even the stones seem reluctant to speak. A mainstream historical fact: at Eboracum, Lindum, and along Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists have uncovered countless inscriptions from other legions, but after the early 2nd century, the Ninth's name simply stops. No tombstones, no altars, no fresh dedications. A quirky, lesser-known detail: among the relics is a half-finished dedication to Mars, carved with the start of the Ninth's name, and then chiseled out. Was it a mistake, or an order to erase? Historians still argue whether this silence was an accident of preservation, or a deliberate act of forgetting. As if the empire itself felt shame in the Ninth's fate. Picture a stonecutter in a chilly yard. Chisel poised above a block. Orders change, and the legion's name is quietly abandoned. The stone is recycled, perhaps turned into a step in a bathhouse. The erased letters smoothed but never fully gone. A mainstream fact: the Roman army honored its dead meticulously. Even common soldiers often had tombstones naming their legion, home province, and family. Yet for the Ninth, such graves vanish after a certain date, as if the men themselves were swallowed by the earth. A quirky note: a single tile stamped Leg IX Hisp was once found reused in a later building, turned face down as if to hide its mark. Historians still argue what that erasure means. Was it routine repurposing, or a quiet condemnation, an order that the legion's memory should not outlive its shame? Imagine visitors to Eboracum generations later, reading names of the 6th Legion carved proudly on gates and bathhouses, never realizing another legion once marched these same streets. Perhaps an old veteran, long transferred to another unit, paused before those stones, remembering lost friends and unspoken disaster. Memory lingering where official record dared not. A mainstream fact: Roman emperors used triumphs and inscriptions to control history. Victories were immortalized, defeats, if they could not be spun as heroism, often went unmentioned. A quirky detail: some commanders left private memorials instead, small shrines or graffiti in remote outposts that escaped imperial censors. Historians still argue if traces of the Ninth survive only in these hidden marks, too small to matter to emperors, but too precious to their men to fully erase. Picture an altar in a windswept ruin, dedicated not by a governor but by a centurion. The name faint, eroded by rain. Perhaps that stone once stood in a shrine to honor comrades who never returned from the northern mists. The missing monuments speak of more than loss, they suggest fear. A legion destroyed wasn't just a military defeat, it risked undermining faith in Rome's invincibility. Better to hush it away. And so, Where there should be stone records of bravery, names, and numbers, there is emptiness, an erasure more deliberate than decay. Yet even erasure leaves clues, chisel marks, unfinished lines, strange gaps in otherwise careful lists, like shadows where statues once stood. The ninth story survives partly because of that silence. Had it ended in a glorious last stand, Rome would have carved it in marble. Its disappearance would have become legend anyway, but the mystery would be smaller. Instead, the missing stones hint at something Rome itself could not accept or explain. And in those empty spaces, centuries later, we find questions sharper than any inscription. So the empire built triumphal arches for victories we barely remember. But for the Ninth Legion, whose absence still haunts the northern wilds, there is no arch, only silence, and a trail of broken stones that refuse to finish the story. Theories etched in dust and ink. When history offers no answer, humans do what we do best, we imagine. And so, over the centuries, the Ninth Legion's disappearance gave rise to an entire library of theories, some sober, some half-whispered in firelight. A mainstream historical fact, the oldest theory, favored by many historians, claims the Ninth was wiped out by northern tribes in Britain around the early 2nd century. A disaster so complete, and so humiliating, that Rome buried the memory rather than record it. A quirky, lesser-known detail, medieval monks, copying older chronicles, sometimes scribbled in margins, the legion that vanished beyond the wall. A note too small to be official history, yet too haunting to leave out. Historians still argue about the strength of local tribes. Could they truly destroy a full legion with cavalry and artillery? Or was it a series of defeats, ambushes, and desertions that left the Ninth hollowed out before it ever faced a final blow? Picture those scribes, bent over parchment by candlelight, letting ink scratch secrets across vellum. Even centuries later, the Ninth's story seemed to them a ghost in the corner of the empire's grand narrative. Another theory: the Ninth wasn't destroyed in Britain at all. Instead, it was quietly transferred to the Rhine or Danube frontiers, fighting Germanic tribes where records are patchier. In that telling, the legion's identity dissolved into reorganized units, and its proud eagle standard might have been hidden, broken, or repurposed under a new number. A mainstream fact: Rome did move legions to trouble spots. Political embarrassment or the need to reinforce hot frontiers often outweighed tradition. A quirky note: in Nijmegen, Netherlands, a few inscriptions seem to mention the Ninth, decades after it vanishes from Britain. Were these men the battered survivors, or simply a clerical echo? Historians still argue whether those inscriptions truly belong to the Ninth, or whether later scribes, used to seeing Leg X, filled in the gaps with a familiar name. Then there's the most exotic theory, that the Ninth was sent east to fight Parthia, perishing in burning deserts far from the fogs of Britain. Supporters point to hints in Eastern records and to Chinese chronicles that mention a strange, disciplined foreign force taken prisoner and resettled. Imagine legionaries who once marched under dripping skies now dying of thirst in lands where vultures circle high above. New languages, new enemies, but the same bronze eagle in hand. A mainstream fact: Rome's eastern campaigns devoured legions. Whole units disappeared from records, sometimes merging into new formations, sometimes dying unnamed. A quirky detail: desert winds can uncover ancient camps, yet sometimes bury them forever. Sand is both archaeologist and censor. Historians still argue which fate is more likely: destruction in Britain's bogs, dissolution in Europe's forests, or death under eastern suns. Each theory has its champions, and each clings to fragments: a tile, a tombstone, a half-erased name. None fully convinces, because each leaves some puzzle piece unfitted. Picture the Ninth's eagle, real or symbolic, carried far from its last known fort, bent by blows, tarnished by rain or sun, still heavy in the hands of a standard-bearer who knows what it means to lose. Perhaps the truth is part of every theory: a legion weakened by skirmishes, transferred, then finally lost to a fate Rome chose not to remember. Or perhaps the Ninth survives only in ink and rumor, its men gone, but its name marching on in scribes' marginalia, in travelers' tales, in our fascination centuries later. So, etched in dust and ink. The ninth lives, not as Rome meant, but as a riddle, proof that what's lost can echo longer than what's proudly recorded. In that gap, between what the empire declared and what truly happened, grows the deepest mystery of all. The empire's unspoken wound. Rome was a machine built to project power, on coins, in stone inscriptions, in the very roads that spanned continents. Yet the Ninth Legion's vanishing left a crack in that facade. A quiet scar the empire never fully explained. A mainstream historical fact, after the Ninth vanished from British records. The empire didn't trumpet retribution. No grand triumphs marched through Rome's arches. No monuments listed northern tribes crushed in vengeance. A quirky, lesser-known detail. Hadrian's Wall, begun just a few years later, may itself hint at imperial anxiety. 73 miles of stone, ditch, and watchtowers, an admission that northern Britain could not be held by force alone. Historians still argue whether the wall was built to keep tribes out, or keep Rome's shame in. A way to draw a clean boundary past which embarrassing memories could be left unspoken. Picture an emperor's advisors debating in candlelit halls. Better to silence the story than risk inspiring revolt among other restless provinces. The Ninth's loss, whether sudden or slow, became state secret by omission. One mainstream fact, in Roman culture, legions weren't supposed to simply vanish. Even defeated legions usually had survivors who carved tombstones, dedicated altars, or left inscriptions in veterans' colonies. A quirky note, the official lists of Roman legions, kept by scribes in marble and ink, quietly dropped the Ninth from later editions, as though crossing out an error best forgotten. Historians still argue whether this was a bureaucratic footnote, or an imperial order to erase a humiliation. Imagine a centurion, transferred to a new legion, told never to speak of his old comrades. The Ninth's eagle perhaps buried, broken, or hidden in an officer's shrine, memory itself becoming contraband. Among the ruins of Eboracum, tourists now stand where the Ninth once drilled, stones that remember nothing, and yet, by their silence, remember everything. A mainstream fact, Emperors Hadrian and Antoninus Pius refortified Britain, pouring resources into forts and walls. Yet none claimed a decisive northern victory. A quirky detail, while the Ninth's fate remains shadowed, the legions that replaced it left endless inscriptions, almost as if to overwrite an uncomfortable absence. Historians still argue what this rewriting of the landscape meant. Was it healing, or was it Rome trying to convince itself the wound had never existed? The Ninth's story is a wound precisely because it should not exist. Legions die in glorious stands, not in quiet erasure. Their memory is supposed to outlive their men. Yet here, a silence so profound it can only point to something Rome dared not name. A defeat of empire. Of certainty. Of the illusion that discipline alone could conquer every horizon. Imagine later generations of legionaries, polishing shields beside Hadrian's Wall, hearing whispers of the Ninth. A cautionary tale kept alive not in books, but in fear. A mainstream fact, the Ninth never reappears under that name. Other legions inherited Britain's defense, and life continued, as empires do. A quirky note, even today, hikers along the wall report an unsettling feeling at dusk, as if unseen ranks still stand watch among the crumbling stones. Historians still argue whether the Ninth's end matters, or whether it's our fascination with mystery itself that keeps it alive. But the truth is, the empire's silence tells us more than an official history ever could. It shows the limits of conquest, the cracks in marble certainty, the truth that not all stories can be controlled. In that silence, the Ninth speaks loudest, not through victories carved in triumphal arches, but through the shadow it left behind. A shadow so deep that, nearly 2,000 years later, we still look north into the mist and wonder, what happened to the legion that should not have been lost? Ghosts on the Roman road. Legends love emptiness. Where the Ninth's footprints fade from stone, rumor steps in, and across the centuries, that rumor has grown into an army of ghosts. A mainstream historical fact, even in late antiquity, Roman writers hinted at a lost legion, swallowed by mist and rebellion. They gave no details, but they gave enough for myth to flourish. A quirky, lesser-known detail. Local folklore in northern England speaks of soldiers glimpsed at twilight, shadows in formation, marching along broken roads that once led to Hadrian's Wall. Historians still argue if these stories trace back to memories of the ninth, or if they're later inventions, born from the melancholy of ruined forts and moss-grown walls. Picture a traveler on the Stangate at dusk, mist rising from the marshes, the low sun turning stone to gold. Ahead, a shape, perhaps a trick of the light, or a column of figures moving with eerie silence. In the next breath, they're gone. One mainstream fact: Roman Britain's roads and forts remained visible for centuries, their ruin inspiring medieval monks and poets. Broken walls invite stories, and silence invites fear. A quirky note: medieval scribes sometimes describe the ninth as cursed to march until doomsday, punished for unknown sins or cowardice. Historians still argue why this legion, and not another, became a focus for such haunting tales. Perhaps because of what was missing: no hero's last stand, no written epitaph. The human mind rebels against a blank page. Better to fill it with ghostly columns than leave it empty. Picture 2. The veterans who survived, if any did, men who knew the ninth's truth, living out their days in quiet Roman towns. Did they tell the tale by the hearth, or keep it buried under a soldier's silence? A mainstream fact: Roman religion saw dishonor as a spiritual stain. A lost standard wasn't just a military failure, it was a religious crisis. A quirky detail: standard bearers, or signifers, often swore personal oaths to the legion's eagle. Losing it could haunt a man for life, if he lived. Historians still argue whether the ninth's eagle was captured, hidden, or buried. A lost eagle could doom a legion's name to oblivion. And so, in absence of stone monuments, stories sprouted. Tales of the ninth's shades marching the wall at moonrise, armor rusted but eyes fixed ahead. In some versions, they seek the eagle they lost; in others, they guard a secret buried in northern hills. The legend changes, but the feeling remains: unfinished business. Men who never came home. Folklore keeps the legion alive where history turned its face away. And the longer the silence of records, the louder the whisper of ghosts. A mainstream fact: modern archaeologists have uncovered no mass graves linked to the ninth. But along the wall, bits of chainmail, broken spearheads, and old camps still emerge, mute witnesses to a vanished age. A quirky note: a single Roman helmet cheekpiece, found near a northern fort, bears a scratched symbol some believe might mark the ninth. Others call it coincidence. Historians still argue whether even one living voice survived to tell what truly happened, or whether the truth died on a northern battlefield no stone will name. So, each time someone walks those roads at dusk, they join a very old story, watching, listening, half expecting the clink of iron-shod sandals on ancient stones. And perhaps, in that hush between daylight and dark, the ninth really does return, at least in imagination. A legion not of flesh and blood, but of memory, fear, and longing for a final answer that never came. A standard lost, a silence kept. Among Rome's countless symbols, none loomed larger in soldiers' hearts than the legionary eagle, bronze wings outstretched, eyes fixed forward, a promise of honor and unity. To lose it was to lose the soul of the legion itself. A mainstream historical fact: each legion had exactly one eagle standard, kept under guard even in camp. Its capture or disappearance demanded investigation, punishment, and sometimes, the legion's disbandment. A quirky, lesser-known detail: standard bearers often carried small protective charms sewn into their belts, tiny silver crescents, knotted cords, to keep the eagle safe. Even the most disciplined soldiers left room for superstition. Historians still argue whether the ninth's eagle was taken by force, buried by loyal hands, or spirited away to prevent enemy triumph. Picture that moment: the ninth reeling under attack, outnumbered on boggy ground, mud sucking at boots, rain blurring vision, horns echoing from unseen ridges. The standard bearer gripping the eagle's pole so hard his knuckles burn. Perhaps, seeing the battle lost, he runs, through bracken and mist, desperate to keep Rome's symbol from falling into tribal hands. Perhaps he buries it under stones, swears an oath, and dies before he can reveal the hiding place. A mainstream fact: when Varus lost 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest, Rome raised whole new legions under the same numbers, but only after failed attempts to recover the lost eagles. For decades, emperors dispatched missions deep into enemy lands just to reclaim them. A quirky note: the ninth eagle was never recorded as recovered, or even officially lost. It simply vanishes from the empire's paperwork. Like the legion itself, historians still argue what that silence means. Was it shame so deep no emperor dared name it? Or does it hint the eagle never left loyal Roman hands, hidden in some northern cairn where moss and fog keep watch? Imagine modern archaeologists combing peat bogs and riverbeds, hearts racing each time the metal detector hums, not just for the sake of bronze and gold, but for the final word on a legion's fate. A mainstream fact: emperors used recovered eagles as powerful propaganda, parading them through Rome as proof the gods still favored the empire. A quirky detail: some later Roman officers reportedly wore small eagle charms on chains under their tunics, a quiet reminder of what could never be lost. Historians still argue whether the ninth's missing eagle explains why the legion's name was quietly dropped. Without its soul, the ninth couldn't be reborn, only replaced. Picture 2. The moment centuries later when a farmer digs in a field near Hadrian's wall and uncovers something bronze. Dirt crusted on feathered wings, broken from its pole, but unmistakable. The farmer might not understand what he holds, but history would tremble. But until that day, the ninth's eagle remains as hidden as the truth of what befell its men. A symbol of unity that perhaps, in its loss, became the empire's most enduring silence. A mainstream fact: in Rome's greatest triumphs, eagles led the parade. In its greatest defeats, their absence shouted louder than any lament. A quirky note: medieval chroniclers, centuries after the legion was gone, still told stories of a lost eagle that would one day be found to reveal the ninth's fate. Historians still argue whether that day will ever come, or if mystery itself is what keeps the ninth alive in imagination. So, a standard lost, a silence kept, and somewhere in the northern mists, a legend that outlived marble, iron, and empire. Because sometimes what's missing tells the richest story of all. Whispers beneath the turf. Time does not keep secrets kindly, but sometimes it does keep them buried. And in the north, where the ground itself remembers, the ninth's silence whispers from beneath turf and peat. A mainstream historical fact: over the last century, excavations at Roman forts like York, Vindolanda, and Carlisle have revealed writing tablets, boots, and fragments of armor from soldiers who once served the empire's northernmost frontier. A quirky, lesser-known detail: among these finds was a child's shoe, tiny, delicate, pierced with decorative holes, proof that Roman forts weren't just garrisons of steel and discipline but living communities, with families, merchants, and laughter echoing against stone walls. Historians still argue whether these remains belong to the ninth, or to the legions that replaced them. The line blurs, as soil forgets the difference between the vanished and those who came after. Picture an archaeologist bent over a trench in morning mist, gloved hands brushing soil from an old tile stamped, Leg IX Hisp. The heart jumps. The mind races, until further study dates it earlier than the legion's last known march. Hope turns to another riddle. A mainstream fact: organic soil in northern Britain preserves leather, wood, and parchment better than stone. That paradox keeps hope alive that a lost dispatch, a soldier's letter, or even a final report may yet emerge. A quirky note: some letters recovered from Vindolanda reveal mundane complaints, cold feet, missing socks, the boredom of watch duty. Even the mightiest empire was built by men worrying about everyday discomforts. Historians still argue whether the next shovel of peat might deliver the ninth's farewell, an order to move, a record of battle, or a final muster roll naming those left behind. Imagine that letter, scrawled on thin wood, ink faded but legible, on the morning of the attack. The ninth mustered. Such a fragment would rewrite books, documentaries, and silence centuries of speculation. Yet until then, the ground teases rather than answers. Finds emerge piecemeal. A brooch here, a spearhead there. Each relic hints at men who lived, marched, and died, but does not confirm how the ninth's march ended. A mainstream fact: Roman forts were often built atop older forts, layer upon layer, each garrison leaving traces. That means the ninth's story may lie beneath stones laid by its successors. A quirky detail: peat bogs sometimes preserve human remains so well that features, hair, and even expressions remain. Yet no lost legionnaire has surfaced so far, only quiet, waterlogged silence. Historians still argue what these absences mean. Did the legion fall far from camp, its bones left scattered and unclaimed? Or did survivors quietly disperse, fading into other units, erasing the need for mass graves? Picture the ninth's last camp. Tents pitched in rain, the eagle standard kept under watch, night falling, fires crackling, the soft hum of men speaking Latin and local dialects, unaware their footprints might be the last. In that soil, hoof prints, sandal studs, and broken pots lie layered like half-remembered stories. And each discovery rekindles the same hope, that somewhere beneath turf and stone waits the ninth's final word, proof of death or survival, heroism or flight. Until then, the peat bogs keep their counsel, the moss covers old roads, and the ninth's silence speaks loudest of all. A story the empire tried to forget, kept alive by the very land it once sought to tame. Theories that refuse to die. When facts run thin, theories breed like ivy on broken walls, clinging to what remains, reaching where history cannot. A mainstream historical fact: no single theory fully explains the ninth's disappearance. Scholars, novelists, and filmmakers have each built their own explanations, each as plausible and incomplete as the next. A quirky, lesser-known detail: in the 1950s, a British author's novel about the ninth popularized the idea of its annihilation beyond Hadrian's Wall, turning academic debate into mainstream legend. Historians still argue whether fiction shaped modern belief more than evidence itself. One enduring theory claims the ninth perished fighting Caledonian tribes in Scotland. A last stand, spears clashing in mist, legionaries outnumbered yet refusing to yield. It's romantic, heroic, and frustratingly unsupported by hard evidence. Picture the legion's final square: shields locked, officers shouting above war horns, rain-soaking crested helmets, and then, only silence where discipline once held firm. Another theory holds the ninth transferred to the Rhine or Danube frontiers, gradually folded into other units. No glorious death, just paperwork and reassignment. The legion's name quietly erased as new threats demanded new numbers. A mainstream fact: Roman armies constantly reorganized. Some legions lived centuries, others only decades. A quirky note: inscriptions of Leg X found on the continent might hint at survivors, or simply be misreadings. Historians still argue whether those few letters prove presence or echo memory. Then comes the Eastern theory: the ninth sent to fight Parthia, destroyed in desert sands, forgotten by chroniclers who focused on emperors, not vanished legions. Imagine legionaries used to Britain's fog now blinded by sun and dust, dying far from their own graves. Some propose darker plots: an imperial purge, the ninth disbanded for rebellion or cowardice, its name scrubbed from records to spare Rome's shame. A mainstream fact: disgraced legions could be dissolved, their soldiers reassigned. A quirky detail: ancient graffiti sometimes insults other legions as cowards, hinting that dishonor lingered in rumor even if erased from marble. Historians still argue whether erasure was punishment or mercy, allowing survivors to serve without stigma. And then, of course, there's the simplest theory, that the ninth dwindled over years: desertions, disease, scattered losses, until little remained to record. No grand disaster, just the quiet dying of a name. Perhaps that ordinariness itself made the story vanish. Rome carved victories into stone, slow fading never earned an inscription. A mainstream fact: some legions ended not in battle but on imperial accountants' ledgers, written off as no longer fit. A quirky note: military bureaucracy preserved lists of bread and barley long after men's names disappeared. Historians still argue what matters more: how a legion died, or how it was remembered. In the end, each theory reveals what we long for: a heroic last stand, a secret scandal, an undiscovered grave, something definite, rather than absence. Yet perhaps it's the absence itself that keeps the ninth alive, a mystery unsolved, inviting every generation to look again. And so, the Legion marches on, not in flesh, but in books, whispers, and the restless curiosity of those who can't let silence lie. In that way, the ninth achieved what emperors craved most, to be remembered forever, even if only as a question without an answer. The echo that outlived empire. As night settles over ruined forts and moss-choked roads, something remarkable endures. The Ninth Legion is still here, not in ranks of bronze and iron, but in story, suspicion, and the stubborn pulse of mystery. A mainstream historical fact, the Roman Empire itself has been gone for over 15 centuries. Yet the ninth remains part of living conversation, debated in lectures, imagined in novels, hunted by archaeologists with every dig. A quirky, lesser-known detail. In the early 20th century, a school near York named its sports teams after the ninth, honoring soldiers lost so long ago that even Rome forgot. Historians still argue why this single legion matters more to us than dozens whose fates are known. Perhaps because the ninth stands where history runs out and legend begins. Picture that border, the last Roman milestone, half sunk in earth, lichen spreading like quiet hands. Beyond it, only hills, mist, and rumor. We keep returning because the story refuses to close. The ninth's disappearance isn't merely an ancient puzzle, it's a mirror of our own need to explain, to find endings, to give loss a shape. A mainstream fact. Some scholars accept we may never know the truth. Records are gone. Ground shifts. Time rots what people once knew by heart. A quirky note. Even now, amateur historians walk the wall's length every summer, metal detectors in hand, hearts still leaping at the hope of bronze feathers in the dirt. Historians still argue whether the ninth's riddle is solvable, or if it matters. For the Legion is now more than history, it's an idea in classrooms and firesides. The ninth marches on. 5.000 shadows on the road. Disciplined footsteps fading into night. And in that fading lies their greatest power. Rome built to last, but what truly endures isn't stone or empire, it's a story no one can finish telling. Imagine centuries from now, new scholars, new theories, children learning Latin and stumbling on Legio IX Hispana, still asking, but what happened next? Even without tombs or triumphs, the ninth achieved the impossible, it outlived Rome by being lost. A mainstream fact. Hadrian's wall still stands. Mile after mile of quarried stone meant to guard against forgetting. Yet the legion it was built to protect remains the greatest blank in its shadow. A quirky detail, at sunrise, the wall's stones seem to glow gold, as if memory itself still burns there, waiting. Historians still argue whether silence is failure, or if it is, in its own strange way, remembrance. And so the ninth becomes what we choose, a tragedy, a cautionary tale, or an echo of Rome's reach exceeding its grasp. Whatever the truth, their absence carved a deeper mark than presence ever could. In the hush before dawn, when the wind brushes the heather and the stones seem almost to listen, you might hear it too. The faint clink of iron, the whisper of sandals on ancient roads, the heartbeat of a legion that never truly left. Because memory, once it takes root in story, can outmarch even the mightiest empire. And now, as the echoes of the ninth fade into the hush of night, let's slow our steps and breathe together. Picture the northern mists rolling softly across ruined walls, stones worn smooth by centuries of rain. The legion that once stood watch there is gone, but in your mind's eye, they still wait, armor dulled by time, silent yet somehow present. Let the pace soften, longer breaths, slower words. Feel the cool air of an ancient frontier settling around your thoughts. Beyond the wall, only moor and twilight, yet within you, the march of that lost legion continues, quiet, but unbroken. The mystery remains, and maybe that's why it comforts as much as it unsettles, knowing some questions outlive even the longest empires. That there are stories which, precisely because they refuse to end, keep us awake, listening. Perhaps tomorrow, someone will walk those ancient stones again, run a hand across weathered carvings, and wonder what truth might still lie hidden beneath moss and earth. For tonight, rest easy in knowing that even in silence, the ninth was never truly forgotten. They live on in every question asked, every theory whispered across a darkened room, and every quiet heartbeat that waits for an answer. So close your eyes, let the last torchlight fade, and let the past settle gently like dusk on the wall. The ninth's story keeps marching, far beyond the end of words,